Okay, I think that's about everyone in. Oh, a few more. Here we go. All righty. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this year's National Engineering Month event. My name is Larissa, and I am Seneca Environmental Association's, or SEA's, president, and one of your hosts tonight. I'll be hosting with Shania, who is SEA's vice president, and Justin, who is SEA's treasurer. Hello again. Before we get into things, I would just like to note a few housekeeping items. So if you are having technical issues, please message the chat and Shania or myself will help you as best that we can. If you do have any questions, we ask that you wait until the end when we open the floor for the Q&A session. At that time, we ask that you post your questions in the chat using the chat function, or use the raise hand function, and we will then proceed to ask you to unmute, just so we don't have everyone unmuting at once. Yep. And then lastly, again, please note that this session is being recorded. Now we would like to move in and hear a word from Seneca's president, David Agnew.
Hello, I'm David Agnew, president of Seneca, and a very warm welcome to this evening's event. And a big thank you to the Seneca Environmental Association and, of course, Engineers Canada, the sponsors of National Engineering Month, for pulling this together. You've picked a great topic, and I'll read it just to make sure I get all the words right. Living city, green spaces is a tool for resilience in the urban environment. And that's why I picked this background, because that's Seneca's contribution to a more resilient landscaping in this, our urban environment here right at Newnham. But it really is a kind of an indication of how your jobs, as you move into your careers, are going to increasingly be about sustainability, about how you can contribute to the fight against climate change, about all the ways that you can think in a different way about engineering and its contribution to a healthier and more sustainable future for our planet. You've got a great panel. Our own Don Forster, director of our new Office of Sustainability. In fact, Don can tell you an awful lot about the Sustainable Landscaping Project that we've undertaken. It's a multi-year project. It involves partnerships with organizations like the City of Toronto and World Wildlife Fund. We're very excited about it, but we know it's just not enough. And we welcome your ideas, your contributions, your suggestions as we think about how we can create the sustainable Seneca. So you're in for a great evening, a great treat with a terrific panel. And remember, this is week 2 of National Engineering Month, and the theme is lifelong learning. And if there's no probably subject more than sustainability, climate change to illustrate how science is evolving, how knowledge is growing, and frankly, the role of engineering will play a bigger and bigger part in solving the world's problems. So it's over to you. Good luck, have a great evening, and thanks very much for joining us.
Okay, that was our introduction. Thanks from President David Agnew. So next we will be moving on to the land acknowledgement portion of the panel.
So before we would let our panelists introduce themselves, we do want to take a moment to acknowledge that we're coming to you from Toronto, which is the Dish with One Spoon territory. We respectfully acknowledge the past and present traditional stewards of the land and their unique role in the life of the region. Toronto is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We'd pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. As settlers, we're very grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play in this territory. Additionally, Alberta University offers a free Indigenous learning course. So if you would like to deepen your knowledge on this subject, you can feel free to explore. So we're now going to hear from our panelists. Just please remember to keep your mics on mute. You can use the raise your hand function and all questions in the chat will be answered at the end of the session during the Q&A portion. So we're now going to pass the baton to Brian, so take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight. This is such an exciting opportunity to be able to speak on sustainability. Like you mentioned, Shai, my name is Brian. I'm the Community Programs Manager at LEAF, which stands for Local Enhancement and Appreciation of Forests. We are a nonprofit organization centered here in Toronto, and our mission is to protect and enhance the urban forest. We currently offer our services to all of the City of Toronto, all of York Region, as well as several municipalities in Durham Region. And what we try to do is get communities engaged. And we also offer educational programming as well as stewardship programming to try to strengthen this vital urban ecosystem. We run several different programs that try to get trees in the ground and people inspired to learn more about their natural surroundings. One of our most successful programs is our backyard tree planting program, which is where we work with homeowners to help them identify the perfect native tree species for their own property and help them plant it in their backyard. We also offer native shrubs as well as perennial species. All of those plant species are a part of the urban forest, obviously. We also offer community planting events. So these take place in York Region and Durham Region, where we literally plant thousands of native tree and shrub species every single year on public lands. And it's a great way for community members to get out and, make take action in trying to combat the impacts of climate change. We also have 6 urban forest demonstration gardens throughout the City of Toronto. So if you're ever, getting on the TTC, either at Spadina, Bathurst, Old Mill, St. Clair, and another one that I always forget. You might actually catch one of our gardens there. They're great little oases of some urban greenery in a very cement world. We also have our Toronto Community Housing Planting and Stewardship Initiative, which is in its 5th year, which is super exciting. This is a relatively new initiative where we partner with TCH residents to green their communities. So residents help select the species that will be planted. And then for the first 2 years of those newly planted trees' lives, they actually care for those trees to ensure that they will reach full maturity. Now, there are 2 opportunities with LEAF that I thought might be of particular interest to folks who are participating with us this evening. The first one is our Young Urban Forest Leaders Program. So this is a free 4-month training and mentorship program offered to Toronto residents between the ages of 18 and 29. And so if you are someone who is passionate about urban forestry and wants to learn more about arboriculture and community engagement, I highly recommend this program. Applications are currently live on our website. I believe that a link should be popping up in the chat sometime soon. So please feel free to take a look at all of that additional information and please apply before the deadline, which is March 31st. Also, we do have some employment opportunities. So if you're someone who would like to actually help us with our backyard tree planting program, or you would like to help us with our community planting events or our TCH Planting and Stewardship Initiative, we have some employment opportunities to support all of those programs. So please, again, take a look at our website and please apply. I thought since, there might be some questions about career development and sort of where all of us panelists sort of got our inspiration to join this line of work, I thought I would also just briefly introduce a bit more about myself. So I became passionate about nature at a very, very young age. If I remember correctly, in preschool kindergarten, Our teachers got us to learn the circle of life from The Lion King. And after watching that movie and hearing that music, I was absolutely hooked when it came to nature, environment, animals. And I just became obsessed with the natural world around me. And when I got into elementary school and high school and learned about the threats of climate change, I was kind of shocked that, this green infrastructure, this natural world that everyone loves and benefits from was being threatened. And so I sort of, made what I thought was the obvious decision to sort of take that and make sure that I devoted my life, my work to trying to combat climate change and make the world a greener, healthier, happier place to live. And with that, I went and did my undergrad and master's at Guelph and Trent respectively for zoology. And then through all of that research, found out that my favorite part about environmental work was actually the people. And so I found opportunities that allowed me to connect with some really incredible folks all around the world, and eventually found my way to LEAF, where I get to sort of, do the work that I've always dreamed of doing, which is connecting with like-minded individuals who are passionate about nature, want to take action, want to see a difference in their own community. And then really it's just my role to sort of support that passion that already exists there. And it's, just a gift every single day. So that's me, that's LEAF. And I will pass it off to whomever the next panelist shall be.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. I love that The Lion King was so motivating for you. It's really good to hear. It's a good movie. So now we'll hear from Don. We'll let Don take it away.
Good afternoon. I'll just wait for my slides to come up. I have about a dozen slides to go through, which I'll go through rather quickly, and then at the end you can ask me additional questions about it. So this is me, Don Forster. I got into sustainability a long time ago. Actually, I grew up on a farm in Laurentian, Quebec, so sustainability was key to our survival, basically. So caring for the land and natural resources were vital to our farming life. I was there till I was early teens, and then we moved into the big city, and that was a real culture shock for me to go from a 100-acre farm to a hustle-bustle city. I've worked in sustainability in just about every position I've held in every organization I've worked in, and before landing at Seneca College. And just to keep my hand in farming, I became a commercial beekeeper a number of years ago. I managed 250 beehives, some of which are at various college and university campuses in Ontario. I use the beekeeping as a conversation piece to generate conversation about land, pollinators, have a lot of conversation with students about the environment and the impacts on the environment I've seen in the last number of years. And as the director of the Office of Sustainability at Seneca, I'm very fortunate to be working in a profession where I can continue to practice my sustainability. Can we go to slide 7, please? So as the director of the Office of Sustainability, our role in sustainability is to guide and assist all the stakeholders of the college on our sustainability strategies. And after about a year and a bit of consultation, we developed our first 5-year sustainability plan, and it came into effect in the fall of last year. So September of 2021, we actually kicked off our first 5-year sustainability plan. In that plan, there's 4 domains of action that we use to drive sustainability forward. So we have leadership. So in that leadership role, we've established the Office of Sustainability. We've hired a couple positions in that department. And our role is to ensure sustainability strategies are carried out throughout the college. Community is another one of the domains. And we're ensuring that collaboration approach to sustainability is, again, throughout the college. A key aspect of one of the domains is education and research. So the college offers meaningful and immersive experiences for students and faculty to help build a sustainable future. And operations is the fourth domain. So in the operations, we're establishing strong policy and procedures at all operational divisions that will further drive our sustainability practice forwards. And this includes how our buildings are designed and the landscape around the buildings are maintained. Next slide, please. So there's many benefits to having green spaces in an urban environment. As the president had alluded in his opening remarks, in the last few years, Seneca College has invested heavily in naturalizing all of our landscape at Newnham campus, and we're starting now to take that same approach at our other campuses. So, the benefits of having we developed a 5-year landscape master plan that guides on how we will naturalize the urban landscape around Newnham campus. And there's many benefits to that. So it touches on biodiversity, stormwater management, reduce erosion, sequester carbon, improving quality of life, and there's quite a list. Next slide, please. The plan also helps us to align landscape planning with our environmental goals. It helps us to build community. It integrates sustainability into our campus culture, and it fosters staff and student well-being. So, if you haven't walked around Seneca Newnham campus in the last year or so, if you do get the opportunity to go back there, you'll see that the whole landscape design there has changed. The courtyard's all been changed to a naturalized landscape, and all around our site building, same thing. It's all naturalized landscape, and the thought behind that was to encourage people to get out, walk through the gardens, enjoy the landscape, reduce the amount of care and landscape care that we have to put into it. We aren't cutting grass, it's planted a lot more trees. And with that landscape design, we've developed some great partnerships with organizations such as WWF Canada, the City of Toronto. Both these partnerships have provided funding for things like pollinator gardens. The City of Toronto funded us. We planted over 200 native trees and 1,200 shrubs last year at Newnham campus. This year, with continued funding from the City of Toronto, we're going to be planting a number of trees at our York University campus. Next slide, please. So greens planning for green spaces it's all about a balanced approach. We must consider a balance between the ecological integrity and the accessibility of the plan that we're putting in place. So ecological integrity is ensuring the structure, composition, function of the ecosystems are unimpaired by the stresses from human activity. Next slide, please. So some of the ecological integrity considerations that we're including whenever we do a landscape plan is we consider the choice of native plants and trees and shrubs, how they're going to be planted, where they're going to be planted, the impact that our plantings have and our gardens have on pollinators, and we want to limit soil compaction, as well as be aware of erosion aspects. Next slide, please. Sorry. We missed that. So anyway, so the accessibility, when we design green spaces, we want to make sure that we incorporate human quality of life, and allowing accessibility to green spaces typically is, if you allow accessibility to green spaces and educate people on how to use the green spaces properly, why they're designed they are, it lowers the impact on the ecological integrity. The balance we shoot for is to have a diverse green spaces that not only allow people to use it, but educate the community on how we care for the green spaces. Next slide, please. So we use 3 pillars as a guide when we are designing landscape. So we have the planning stage, obviously planning the space, including how the space will be used. Diversity of the space, again, the ecological integrity. We don't want to damage it, that damages the land, and we want to make it very usable. What the impact is on the development around the land, so we have to consider that. All of our new designs for landscape are including a maintenance plan, such as an integrated pest management plan. We're taking care of the lands without any pesticides, low mow areas, that sort of thing. So, and then there's the engagement and educational component, working with some of the partners that we've developed to engage for engagement activities and trying to incorporate an educational outcome in when we design our landscapes. Next slide, please. We also incorporate low impact development into our landscape plans. So that's basically a collection of practices that aim to mitigate against climate and ecosystem impacts. We look at ecological integrity in the form of biodiversity, water and stormwater management, connectivity, heating regulations, etc. There's a number of impacts that we look at when we're designing not only our buildings, but our landscape around the buildings. We look at bioswale, stormwater ponds, pollinator gardens, green roofs, permanent pavements, low mow grass areas. We look at how we can incorporate solar panels, for instance, on our rooftops, that sort of thing. So all of Seneca's buildings are built to LEED Gold certification, and impact development is a large component of the LEED building rating certificates that we go for. And we usually get gold ratings. So we strive to get the highest ratings and certificates that we can. Next slide, please. So incorporating metrics of well-being, low impact development into building standards, ensured green space results in our environmental and social outcomes. So again, we look at green roofs, solar panels, water runoffs, erosion, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. Our landscape strategy is demonstrated by a number of projects that we currently have in place. For next slide, please. So our goal for our landscape revitalization plan started way back in 2016, basically. At that time, I was actually responsible for the grounds at Seneca colleges, all those campuses. And I noticed we were investing a lot of labor and time in cutting grasses and hard to maintain areas and trying to keep that manicured lawn look. We didn't really have a lot of good growing trees, that sort of thing. So in 2016, we made a concerted effort to try and change the landscape around our campuses. And that's when we actually started to work on our naturalization plan, our 5-year plan. And since then, we've come a long way. Newnham campus, this year is the last year of the 5-year plan for Newnham campus, where we'll be finishing off with all of our trees, our landscape. It's all low mold grasses. We've put a lot of money and effort into, got some great partnerships to help us naturalize the landscape. Next slide, please. Yeah, so not only at Newnham campus, now that we're wrapping up this year, our 5-year plan, we're looking at our York campus. We have a campus at Seneca York. We have a courtyard there that's been, it's been bad shape for about 7 or 8 years. So this year, we're starting on a new project there. We're going to redo that whole courtyard. It's going to be about $1 million worth of landscaping that we're doing there. And the whole concept behind that is, the environmental impact. We're going to make it inviting. So, we're taking in the social responsibility of well-being of people. They can come out and enjoy that, relax in the courtyards and gardens, how functional it's going to be. And we're looking at the educational engagement component when we design the landscape up there. So we're looking at those aspects as well. Next slide, please. So right now we're in a planning stage of a new wellness center at Newnham campus. So we understand, we acknowledge that the connection between mental health and well-being with accessibility to quality green spaces is a key to student success and the ability to have meaningful interaction with our environment and partnership. So as we're designing the new wellness center, we're going to try and incorporate the outside gardens into the inside building. So it's almost like a continuous flow where you can have enjoy both the inside outside environment basically mixed together. Next slide, please. And I just talked about the courtyard Seneca at Seneca York. Again, that's going to be a major accomplishment for us this year. We're incorporating a lot of Indigenous learning and techniques into that courtyard. It's going to be a lot of thought giving into how accessible the space is, space for activities, wellness focused, the seating areas, shade. So a lot goes into that plan of that one. I think that's it. I don't think I have another slide, right? I think that's the last one.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Don. It was awesome to hear that. It's really great to hear that Seneca is doing all these initiatives and starting so much more and expanding to York. It was great. So now we'll hear from Allison from Forest Ontario.
Hello. I did not prepare slides. I was a little behind, so you just get to look at me while I talk. But I'll be very animated, so hope that will help. So as was mentioned, my name is Allison, and I'm the Education Manager at Forest Ontario. Forest Ontario, despite what our name sounds like, is not government. We're a not-for-profit charitable organization that's dedicated to tree planting and education and awareness and growing stronger, more sustainable forests into the future. So I started with Forest Ontario way back when, in 2011, when it was actually called the Ontario Forestry Association. I don't really remember a time when I didn't want to work in the environmental sector and I didn't love being outdoors. So my pathway within the environmental not-for-profit sector was quite direct. I graduated from Trent University with a BA Honors in Environmental Resource Management, as well as Anthropology for Good Measure. And then I dove straight into working at provincial parks, working at environmental interpretation centers. I worked at a straw bale building, all ending up within the education environmental sector. As education manager at Forest Ontario, I spend most of my time working on developing, planning, delivering, and fundraising for education and outreach programs and events. Some of the notable ones being the Ontario Envirothon program, which is part of a larger North American initiative. And in 2016, Forest Ontario did actually host the North American level event at Trent University, where we had about 500 students all gather at Trent to compete for the championship title. We also run Tree Bee, which is a little less competitive. It's a tree identification competition for students in grade 4, 5, and 6. And while it's not international travel and overnight events, they do get quite competitive about their native tree ID and the Heritage Tree Program. On the tree planting side, we're probably best known for administering the 50 million tree program. And we're taking a toe dive into seeing how we can support the 2 billion tree initiative nationally. So when I was younger, for my background origin story, I was very lucky to have regular access to the great outdoors, and I would spend a few weeks every summer at a boat-in access camp outside of Chapleau. So out towards Wawa, Timmins area. I credit those experiences with my passion for the outdoors and my fascination with nature and the environment. but recognize that not everybody has the capacity or the time to take a 12-hour car trip just to spend some time in the woods. So I think nearby nature and equitable access to those green spaces within and near our communities is so important to help foster an appreciation and understanding of forests, which is what we need to help support those ecosystems. So I have some points to get on later about why we tree plant and specifically why we tree plant in the green belt, but I will let us get to our directed questions first.
Awesome. Okay, so with that, we will move into our panel discussion and then we will have our Q&A session. So first question, and we'll start with Brian. How do you define urban resilience?
All right, we'll jump into these ones. Urban resilience, I'm sure, well, I imagine Allison, Dawn, myself, we're all going to have pretty similar definitions for these. But urban resiliency, in my mind, is the ability for an urban space and community to rebound or bounce back from any sort of stress, whether that be sort of like an instantaneous stress. It could be a severe, severe weather event like major flooding, lightning storm, things like that, or it could be, sort of prolonged, almost like chronic type of stress. So like, just the wear and tear on infrastructure, all that sort of stuff. So it's the capacity for an urban community and urban space to be able to bounce back from those types of stresses. And I think more and more we're finding that sort of the solutions or answers to, our capacity to rebound from these stresses actually already kind of exist in the natural world. And a lot of times it's about reintroducing some of that green infrastructure back into our urban areas where we can actually see those mitigating effects take place while also just benefiting from being around nature. So that's sort of my take on urban resiliency.
Excellent take. I really like that. The key to bounce back is very important. Okay, Dawn, how would you define urban resilience?
I think I'm right along the same lines as Brian, and I'll use Seneca College, the Newnham campus, as an example of bouncing back and being resilient. There's been years of building, years of parking lots, years of oversalt use, et cetera, et cetera. So it actually ran the property right down. Trees, a lot of the trees were gone, a lot of the trees were not managed properly. So, the property looked like a typical urban environment where a lot of the focus was on the infrastructure, the buildings, rather than focusing on the landscape itself. So like in 2016, when we made is actually when we started to think about bouncing back from what the landscape looked like to making it more of a naturalized, usable landscape. And we've invested, like I say, a lot of time, a lot of money. We're continuing to do that. So in my opinion, we're being resilient is bouncing back from what we basically destroyed, turned everything to cement and parking lots and buildings back into a very usable, environmental friendly landscape.
Awesome. Again, another great one. Bouncing back, reusable, very similar terms. We love it. Allison, so how would you define urban resilience?
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to echo probably some of the sentiments that the other panelists have mentioned, but resiliency, as I wrote down so I'd be ready, is an ability to recover and adapt is what came to mind for me. Resilient systems can be, or systems both natural and man-made can have resiliency in how they're designed and developed. But most importantly, diversity is so important in a resilient system. So from an ecological point of view, we're talking about biodiversity, biodiverse ecosystems supporting a variety of life and function, which are healthier. They're better able to adapt to stress. They're better able to provide in those services that we benefit from so greatly. And then within a built environment, there are resiliencies within communities related to physical and mental health. And again, having access to those green spaces has been associated with reduced anxiety, increased mental retention, reductions in asthma and other physical ailments. So yeah, diversity, recovery, ability to adapt. That's probably how I would describe it.
Awesome. And I love the point you brought up about helping with anxieties and such. That's also really important. And I don't think it's talked about enough. Okay, so next question. Again, we'll start back at the top with Brian. How do you define green spaces?
Honestly, any place where you've got a little bit of nature. One thing that that I've really gotten excited about with the work we do at LEAF is that no space too big or too small can't be considered a green space. As long as there's greenery, as long as there's nature that's existing there, that is still a valuable component of the overall urban forest ecosystem. And so when we think about, large naturalized areas, public parks, those all spring to mind when people think about going out to nature, having to go a far distance to go see nature, big ravine systems, all that sort of stuff. But it can be your small garden in your backyard. It could be your balcony. That's still a part of the ecosystem. It's essentially just a man-made cliff edge. You can still have greenery that exists there. And so, I think there's a lot of creative and innovative ways in which we can allow nature and green spaces back into our urban settings. And like I said, regardless of how big or small your space might be, I would encourage you to find, those plant species that would really thrive there, because then biodiversity overall will improve.
Awesome. So small things, smallest little things can make the ripple in the water type thing. I love that. Okay, Don. So how do you define green spaces?
Well, again, I keep going back to our Seneca Green our landscape plan, because basically we've incorporated a lot of the green space concept into it. So we look at it holistically. It's a space that's inviting people to come out, get some fresh air, relax, enjoy nature, walk through it, sit if they want. We also look at, the carbon offsets and what we're planting, the shade and heat loss, how we're going to reduce water runoff and land erosion. So all those concepts go into a green space. We try and set up the landscape so it's again low-mow areas where it's not taking a lot of maintenance. Invite pollinators, that sort of thing. We look at in our designs, we're also looking at incorporating things like using less salt, for instance, on our winter road salt. We at Seneca, anyway, we've reduced it down to 50% by closing off areas that aren't needed in the winter. So we're saving the new landscape that we basically put in there. So it's an environment that's inviting. People like to go out to it. They can get in touch with nature, relax, walk around the campus, get some exercise. To me, that's all what we're trying to incorporate in our green space.
Awesome. Okay. Allison, how do you define green spaces?
So I think looking at the intent of the space is important. So from a very technical point of view, an urban forest is a type of green space, and that's just the collection of trees within a city. Brian's right, you can find your own green space anywhere, and that's really important. But if we're thinking about green space in terms of infrastructure and the services that it's going to provide, like carbon capture and sequestration, cooling down, urban island effect, you're probably looking at a different type of green space, because while we all spend time in a park can be relaxing and re-energizing, a small parkette with, say, 2 trees isn't going to do the same thing. So that's why we're also very lucky to be so close to the green belt, which is an excellent example of an intact, to a degree, green space that is being planned for to ensure that we limit fragmentation and provide those space for that biodiversity, because Southern Ontario is so densely populated compared to the rest of the country. We're talking about between 13 and up to, in the next couple of years, 15 million people in such a small area, all looking for their own green space. But at the same time, Southern Ontario is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems and regions in the country. By virtue of we have the Carolinian zone, we're so close to like high biodiversity areas. And as of 2011, the Greenbelt was home to 78 of 78 species at risk. So like we're competing with a lot of other organisms for the same kind of green space. So long story short, I think, like Brian said, anything can be a green space, but we need to be mindful of what green spaces are we protecting and creating for what purpose, so that we have a good combination of what we need within an urban area and what we need within a functioning ecosystem.
Awesome. Kind of a scary statistic to hear that many people are going to be looking, but it's great that we're doing what we can to improve it.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, back to Brian. What do you believe to be the most impactful urban resilience methods used today? Could be daily life, just like in general.
Well, first off, I just have to commend Allison. That was an amazing point that you made, and I really appreciate you making it. I feel a little ill-equipped to answer this question completely. I don't think I'm 100% certain of what the best approach is. I can only sort of speak to the work that I do and that LEAF does, and our main our main practice in order to mitigate climate change is by planting more trees. However, I know, being connected to social media, there are some videos going around where they talk about, or they question the validity of whether or not tree planting can actually make a substantial impact in terms of mitigating climate change and actually increasing our society's capacity to be sustainable. And so there are some things I'd like to make very, very clear. Planting trees are important, but you do have to plant them the correct way, sort of to what Allison was saying. You can't just sort of haphazardly plant some trees and then call it a day and think that you've won the battle. It's important to know which trees you're planting, where you're planting them, what the overall ecological benefits and services you're trying to get are being met. So for us, we're very clear that we will only plant native tree species. Just simply because it is those species that have existed here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years and have co-evolved with all the other life forms in this area. So it will strengthen the resiliency of, our urban forest. Another really important thing to mention, Allison sort of alluded to this already, but was diversity. One of the biggest issues we see right now across the urban forest and the GTA is a real lack of diversity. And when we see, what are the most abundant tree species, some of them are non-native and invasive species as well, which is very problematic, especially when you're thinking of diseases, pests that might come in, climate change, these things are going to threaten certain species. I think a clear, obvious depiction of that is emerald ash borer. We in the GTA, we planted back in the day a lot of ash trees, not thinking that an insect from the other side of the world would come in and completely decimate that species. And now we're sort of paying the price because a huge chunk of our canopy cover is being lost, and there really isn't a strong enough way in which we can stop that threat. We just sort of have to see it through at this point and use it as sort of a cautionary tale. So diversity is very key. Another thing I'd just like to point out is that right now we have a real skewing of sort of a lot of young, small trees in our urban forest, which is great. It means that people are planting trees. It means that people want more trees in their communities, but we're seeing a very low percentage of those large established trees. It's usually most municipalities about 1% is those large old established trees, and so this can be really problematic because as trees grow, they're one of the only types of infrastructure that actually appreciate in value as they get older, as they grow. So all these benefits, when we think of like urban heat island effects, stormwater management, carbon sequestration, like all of those benefits increase as the tree grows. And so if we are not doing our parts as stewards of this land to ensure that these trees reach full maturity, we are actually missing out on the full potential of the benefits that they could provide us. And so it is really important that we're not simply focused on planting trees, but that we're also focused on educating and engaging communities so that way they understand the value of protecting those trees and caring for them so that way they reach full maturity. So I hope that answered some of your question, but I'm sure Dawn and Allison have many more ideas and methods in which we can sort of reach these sustainable goals.
Awesome. I agree. I feel I've seen it a lot too in my, like the past just few years. I've really noticed that people are planting trees and they're not really doing it right. Like this summer, I saw a new tree planted, but they had volcanoed the mulch up around it. And oh, killed me to see that. I just really
Don't
want
start
to
with me. Don't start with me with these mulch volcanoes. It is, oh.
It's like a disease.
I think if ever,
So
hey, if you've got some anger in you, I'll just say this. If you've got some anger in you and you need to really let it out, go kick down some mulch volcanoes. It's a great workout. You're helping the tree and you can release some of that energy.
you heard it here first, guys. Start kicking down those volcano mulches. Awesome. Okay. So Dawn, what do you believe, in your opinion, is the most impactful urban resilience method used today?
Well, it's a combination of a number of things. You know, planting trees, yes, for sure, but water, stormwater management, all native, like native plants, very usable. Landscape where, you know, it's not just a planted forest where it grows and you can't use it, people can't get out and enjoy it. Diversity of the plants that you're planting, thinking about the maintenance that goes along with them. That to me is, you know, you have to be able to use it, enjoy it. You have to be able to attract pollinators, birds, wildlife, bugs, bees, you know, all those animals that would typically use it, use the landscape, the grasses and trees. So something is very usable for not only human use, but animal life, and something that has a positive environmental impact.
So I think the first thing that comes to mind when you say that is you mentioned your beekeeping. I feel like that does the benefits to the animals and also us because we can get honey from it and other resources. Yeah.
Yeah, and with beekeeping, like I have 250 beehives spread from Mississauga, the rooftop of the University of Toronto, Mississauga, right out to Queen's University in Kingston. And I see so many different diverse landscapes from an urban to country settings. And I've seen so much changes. And, you know, pesticide use is hard on not just, you know, honeybees, but a lot of different plants and animals out there. You know, we're losing farmland, a lot less food sources for pollinators. So when I'm thinking of designing or when I'm talking about a landscape that's multi-use, I look at how does it impact the wildlife, pollinators, and how useful is it to, you know, individuals to get out and use as well.
Right. Oh, pesticides. I feel like I've learned about so much about them this year, and I would agree it's like one of the most impactful negative effects on the environment. It's just devastating. Yeah, not great. So
Yeah,
Allison.
herbicides and pesticides are very damaging, but also, you know, like Brian pointed out, you can't just stick a tree in the ground and hopefully that's the right tree for the right area. You have to do some research, understand what trees grow where, you know, and how they're going to grow in the area you're putting them in. So it's a little bit of research goes into it. Everybody thinks, oh, I'll just plant a tree. That'll be great for the environment. Well, yeah, it is if it's the right tree in the right spot. But if it's not, you know, don't waste your time and money because you're not doing anybody any good.
So what you're saying is it shouldn't be a tree of heaven. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I heard a lot of great points And I have to say that Brian took some of the words out of my mouth. There is a lot of conflicting evidence about the value of tree planting and at what point in a forest or tree's life it is a carbon sink versus a the other one. So it can be a challenge, and we have to express that, you know, individually we can make adjustments to our lifestyle and we can make positive choices, but structurally there are, as a society, things that can be more impactful that us as individuals can achieve. But that said, we shouldn't do nothing. So I will have to put a plug in for tree planting, just because I think I'm contractually obligated. And within Southern Ontario in the Greenbelt area, Forest Ontario has partnered with the Greenbelt Foundation to start increasing trees on private property. This is important to us because looking within Southern Ontario, the vast majority of land is privately owned. So our ability to plant do large scale planting means we need to find partnerships. And one of the goals we're working towards is to increase canopy cover. So I believe it was Climate Change Canada has established kind of a goal of 30% canopy cover as an ideal for a resilient urban forest. We're not there within the GTA. We're not there in most cities, to be fair. So I think we're looking at maybe a 10% bump to help us get a little bit closer. So that's kind of like tree planting is such a benefit when you're putting the right tree in the right place for the right reason. And it's sad to see the impacts of something like emerald ash borer, because this wasn't something that was unpredictable. Before EAB and ash, there was chestnut blight and the American chestnut, and there was Dutch elm disease, and there was Dutch elm trees. And all these species have been decimated on our landscape by invasive pests or pathogens. So to see the same thing happen with one more species is like, and now we're left with so many of those Norway maples, which are an extremely hardy species, but biodiversity wastelands for the most part, and definitely not native. I do also want to give a plug for impactful actions because I love Not Far From the Forest. They are a Toronto-based organization that does gleaning. So when we look around with food security and we're talking about resilient communities again and benefits to human society, access to fresh and healthy food can be a challenge in many communities. So Not Far From the Tree pairs property owners who have an abundance of tree fruit or fruit at different times of the year, because who can eat a full mulberry tree of mulberries? Like nobody wants that. It's messy, it's smelly, it attracts pests. So they pair those volunteers to glean and collect, and then a third goes to a food bank, a third goes to the gleaners and the volunteers, and then a third goes to the organization itself for redistribution. So it's a really cool model, and food forests are popping up in cities around the province and the country probably, but I mean, Not Far From the Tree is one of the pioneers. I know Sudbury has a food forest initiative going as well. So I think that's a really impactful and interesting way to kind of localize what you're eating. Reduce food waste, and just keep your streets a little cleaner. But yeah, I'll go tree planting too.
Awesome. That's really great to hear. I never knew, like walking down the forest, like walking in Toronto, where we see all those like fruits and nothing's happening with them. I always felt so bad. So that's really interesting to hear that there's something happening to combat that and use the resources there. And sorry, did you say that was with impactful actions, or are you just saying that was?
I was saying it's an impactful action, preventing food waste and buying, collecting local. So, your fruit's not coming from hundreds of kilometers away now.
Right. Also great. Okay, well, I will pass the baton to Shania and she will ask the next few questions.
So the next question, Brian, how would you rate the GTA in terms of sustainability in the face of climate change at this moment?
Oh, good question. Just to pull back the curtain, I did see these questions before, and this one did make me giggle a little bit because initially I went, well, is this like a pass-fail grade? Are we doing percentages? Are we doing letters? Like, how are we really adjudicating our sustainability? I guess, what I'll say is this. I think that there are a lot of individuals. I think there are a lot of groups I think there are a lot of private entities that are taking solid, necessary steps to get us to a more sustainable future. Dawn has, given us many examples on the Seneca campus, which are inspiring and hopefully, sort of set a new precedent for how campuses can look across the province. Allison just mentioned Not Far From the Tree, another group that does incredible work. Obviously, Forest Ontario does great work. The folks that I work with at LEAF are very passionate. I get to meet amazing people all the time. And so there is a lot of, boots on the ground, people doing the work to get us to a more sustainable place. With that being said, if this was a pass-fail type situation, I would have to lean us more to a fail side. The reason I say that, and I'll just, put it out there, even us having this type of conversation should sort of give you an idea of where we are on that spectrum of reaching a more sustainable future. But sort of the hope that I put out there, and because I don't like it when we talk about environmentalism and it's a very doom and gloom type presentation. I guess the hopefulness that I put out there is that a lot of the solutions, a lot of the answers are there. We might not know everything, but we certainly have some really good leads in terms of how we can create a healthier, safer, happier, greener future for ourselves. And just seeing, well, I can't see you, but knowing that there's a number of really creative, intelligent, young, enthusiastic, passionate people here this evening, this is one of those moments where I go, oh, okay, we're still moving in the right direction. But at this point, if it was a pass fail, ooh, it would have to be a fail for me. That's what I'll say.
Well said. I think that's definitely a fair grade. Definitely have some work to do, but I like that you said there's still a lot of hope, which is good. Dawn, do you have anything you wanted to add in terms of how you would currently grade the GTA?
Well, yeah, I'd have to agree with Brian. More on a pass fail. GTA to me is not too far above fail because of when I look around and I see. Well, I'm looking at Toronto specifically. It's such a densely populated area. A lot of travel by vehicle, smog, not enough solar fields, not enough panels on roofs. Like there's a lot of things that can still be done. There's still a lot more that should be done. All the green space, a lot of the green space is being chewed up. When I travel, like I said, when I travel in and around the GTA, all the farmlands being taken away. It's all being, becoming housing corporations and buildings. And so I don't think there's a lot of or enough planning of into the future what our lands are going to be like. You look at our farming areas, I don't know how people are going to eat in the next 10, 15 years. Unless people come up with alternative farming methods, there's not going to be enough food to sustain everybody. So I don't think there's a lot of long-term planning as far as sustainability goes. So I'm a little worried about what it's going to be like 10, 15 years out from now.
Makes sense. And then for the sake of time, Allison, I just want to ask you a different question.
Sure.
In your opinion, do you think that we should be putting our efforts into adapting or more so into fighting climate change?
So I think this is a good question to shift to, because it's essentially asking, it's like the follow-up to how are we doing? Because, if we're not doing that well, are we fighting or adapting? And I think the reality is we've passed the point where we can say we can reasonably fight and win against climate change. They've had the parts per million measurements out. We've kind of blown by those. So we're at the point where we have to adapt to climate change, while at the same time seeing what we can do to mitigate or minimize those effects. So tree planting is a great example in that we talk about how we can capture and store carbon. So that's the intent of large scale tree planting. The same thing can be said for, I think seagrass was found to be an exceptionally good store of carbon as well. So finding those locations where we can kind of claw it back. Peatlands are another one. So restoring those ecosystems that are just known to be permanent carbon sinks. I think there's some interesting work also being done with carbon capture from the air, just at an industrial level. I believe it happened in Iceland or Finland. They put a big factory out. It's going to be a drop in the bucket right now, but it's a proof of concept. So can we literally suck carbon out of the air and put it in something and hold on to it? So yeah, long story short, without being negative, because there is a lot of good work happening, and it's not like there's no hope, but I say we're past fighting alone. It's adapt.
Yeah, lots of good ideas out there, and
Yeah, I think
we're excited to see them happen.
I think we need a lot more research technologies. Like you say, look outside of Canada, what's happening globally. There's a lot of good work being done there. And, some of those ideas and concepts we should be looking at them here as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then Justin had a few questions as well. So over to you, Justin.
Thanks, Shania. So now we'll be moving into a bit more personal oriented questions. So just to start off with Brian, as co-founder and contributor of Earth Unfiltered, which provides news to youth, would you mind talking a bit on what prompted you to start this initiative?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I am so shocked that you even found Earth Unfiltered out there, because it has not been updated for a very long time.
We have to search a bit. But
So first off, how dare you?
Mhm.
Secondly, I will tell you how it started. I worked at a zoo camp for many summers, and it was hugely inspiring to be able to work with, young kids anywhere from 8 to 16, so passionate, so enthusiastic, and clearly more informed than I ever was as a child about climate change and the environment. And we would have these incredible discussions, and it sort of felt like, they would all come from all these different walks of life, and they would find that like commonality and that community at this camp. But then the week or two or month would go by, and they would have to go back to, to their hometowns and maybe continue the fight, or maybe not, or maybe find, like-minded folks, or maybe not. And so my coworker and I came up with this idea of starting a website that we were hoping would be used by them. So that way they could still get, information that was fun and engaging about the environment and things that they could do to sort of support the environment. And so it was all meant to be sort of tongue in cheek. If you look at some of those articles, some are very informative, some of them are super silly. But it was this idea that like environmentalism can be fun, it can be engaging, it can be exciting, it can be a positive experience. So yeah, that was sort of the inception of that. And if anyone wants that domain name, just send me an email. If someone wants to carry that torch, go for it.
It's really good, just kind of continuing on the summer fun while having a nice activist and trying to make an impact. Make sure I stay connected. I like that. So the next question will be for Dawn. How important do you believe education is as a sustainable environmental measure?
Oh, very important. As a matter of fact, it's so important that one of the sustainability plan mandates that we have at Seneca is we're going to integrate sustainability into all of our curriculum. I mean, it's important that people learn about sustainability, learn about the impacts that we have, how, what technologies we can use, what kind of research we can do. It's very important that the next generation behind us understand what the impacts are and come up with some innovative ideas on how to reduce the climate action, the negative climate action that we have. It's very important. So I know Seneca, from a higher ed perspective, we think it's very important, so important that we're going to spend a lot of time and effort integrating sustainability into all of the curriculum.
Definitely, even the fact that we as students are here just able to come together and create this panel with all these wonderful guests. I'd say that definitely speaks to it. Thank you. And another personal question, this one will be for Allison. What is some of the workforce Ontario is participating with the Greenbelt Foundation to accomplish, and why?
Okay, so just a bit of background to make sure we're on the same page about what the Greenbelt is. It's about 1.8 million acres of forest and agricultural land kind of located in southern Ontario. It stretches from Niagara-on-the-Lake to the tip of Bruce Peninsula in Tobermory, and from Sheffield in the west to Newtonville in the east. So it's kind of like a, yeah, we've all seen the map, but just want to make sure we're picturing the same kind of swath. So this is an important piece of land because habitat fragmentation across southern Ontario is rampant. It's what happens when we develop, and fragmented ecosystems can genetically and physically isolate different species. So the more connectivity we can have within our green spaces, the better. So the Greenbelt represents a very good chance to keep kind of that intact. And again, it's a home to such a diversity of species and such a high number of species at risk, given its proximity to the Carolinian zone. So Forest Ontario, like I mentioned, has partnered with the Greenbelt Foundation to increase forest cover on private property, just in the Greenbelt area, to kind of grow that infrastructure, to give us more of the canopy cover that I mentioned before, which we need for a sustainable system. So tree planting itself has just so many benefits, and a lot of them have been touched on, but just to make sure we've said them all: carbon sequestration and capture, filtering emissions and pollutants, reducing floodwater through infiltration of both rainfall events and spring melt, and providing a cooling effect. There was a study done in Peel, and they found like high density treed areas could feel up to 11 degrees cooler than the untreed areas. So as we enter an age where we're having more common heat effects and heat warning days, that natural cooling is going to be more and more important, because cities themselves are already hotter than the surrounding area due to the concrete. And yeah, habitat and carbon sequestration. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet that's super exciting and fun about green spaces is their impact to just jobs. So within the GTA Greenbelt area, it's estimated that 8,700 jobs and approximately $509 million in direct GDP impacts are generated. And that's from those like green jobs only. We're not even talking about the value equivalent of natural infrastructure services, which some organizations are working to kind of value to give it more context. So this $509 million comes from jobs and economies that rely on the functions and benefits of a healthy, thriving ecosystem. So ecotourism, agriculture, forestry, native plant industry, yeah. So that's kind of like why we're working in this area. And tree planting, just because we've always loved it. We planted before, there's a green belt, we'll keep planting if it for some reason disappears.
Well, thanks. Glad to see you guys are still sticking with the tree planting all the way through. And even as the days get hotter, even this summer, I noticed that a bit hotter days. So definitely working to cool that down for us would definitely be great. I wouldn't be opposed to it. So next I'll hand it back over to Shania for a few more questions.
So just another question for you, Allison, just to piggyback off of what you were saying just now. Would you be able to list the values of tree planting specifically within the context of a green belt and how trees contribute to resilience?
So I'm not sure that the values of tree planting would change too much in a green belt versus independently. The main difference being if we're planting in an area to keep the connectivity there. So that way we can have the genetic and physical movement of different species. But planting a tree in a park individually, it would act very similar to a forest in terms of carbon sequestration, pollution, rainwater collection. But again, those values are amplified when we plant a full forest, and trees themselves tend to be less stressed. A tree alone in the middle of a park, it's going to dry out faster if it's too hot. It's going to have more stress from air pollutants if it's in an urban area. So yeah, planting them in the forest, well, a lot of the benefits will be similar. the survivability and survival rate could also go up. I know Brian mentioned that right tree, right place, because if you just plop a tree down, then you don't plant it and we get a drought, odds are you're not going to have a tree there the next year. Yeah, I'm not sure that there's, the only other difference I would say in a greenbelt planting is, again, if we're strengthening that greenbelt and we're giving more people easy access to green space that they can go to on a more regular basis. A greenbelt in a full forest is a different feel than a park. And I do know, like, I've been on tours with people that haven't, like, I was in a conservation area in Burlington once with a school group. And, you know, that was the biggest forest they'd ever been to. And some of the kids were legitimately afraid of a bear, which I think has happened in Burlington like maybe 3 times in all of modern history. So, you know, exposure to an actual forest will also help people feel more comfortable with it and be more likely to protect it. So, you know, planting within the greenbelt and making it bigger and more accessible would be different in that regard as well.
Yeah, I think that's a interesting perspective that probably not all of us will think of when we're usually thinking about tree planting. So thank you for that. And then another question for Brian. Given your experience within the environmental sector, where do you see the future of resilience mitigation measures heading?
That is a very good question. I wish I was a fortune teller and I had a clearer answer. To be perfectly honest, I do not know for certain where we're heading in terms of mitigation strategies. My hope is that we will be moving in a direction that is more socially responsible and holistic in our approach. I think tree inequity has been mentioned a couple of times during the session here today. And I think it's very important for us to ask the questions when it comes to tree planting initiatives and sustainability initiatives and greening projects, to ask ourselves, you know, where are these projects taking place? Who is benefiting from them, and who actually needs the most resources and projects provided to them, so that way they can be more adaptable, or their communities can be more adaptable to the stresses of climate change. You know, if you look in the city of Toronto and you put a map of, you know, the most dense canopy cover areas to you know, median income, you will see a very clear pattern, a very clear correlation that the wealthiest neighborhoods in Toronto have the most trees. Trees are seen as sort of a symbol of wealth and having things. And there are very clear areas within the city where folks do not have access to green spaces. And those same areas also quite often don't have access to proper healthcare, food security, stable housing, you know, and you can parse those lines by socioeconomic status, racial divides, all sorts of things. And it is very clear that there are the haves and the have-nots within our society. And so I think moving forward, when we, you know, look at who's at the most risk of, you know, the impacts of climate change, whether it be within our city, then the province, the country, the world, it is very clear who's going to be the most impacted. And it is those areas currently that are not being serviced enough to be able to, like we talked about, be resilient to all of these stresses that are going to come across with climate change. So my hope is all of this innovation, all of this thought, all of these resources that are being put into creating a more sustainable future will be distributed equally amongst our society. So that way we can all adapt to these changes and come out, you know, a little less scathed. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I think that's definitely something we always need to consider. There's so many just different factors in so many different areas, and it's important to consider them all. So that concludes the panel discussion. And we'd now like to open the floor and allow attendees to ask any questions you may have. You can send them in the chat. You can also direct message or raise your hand or let us know if you want to keep it anonymous. So if you do want to keep it anonymous, you can just privately message me. So right now we have one question. So firstly, I'd like to ask Dawn, is there a role for Indigenous knowledge or teachings in environmental stewardship and mitigating climate change?
A great question, and I believe there is. I mean, the knowledge that our Indigenous people have, you know, they were stewards of the land long before anybody else came here, and they understand. You know, they've been warning us all along the impacts of climate change and how the whole world is changing, the earth is changing, and how nobody's really concentrated or thought much about it. So the Indigenous knowledge and the teachings and learnings that we get from that are very important. I know at Seneca, we're trying to incorporate a lot of that in Indigenous knowledge to the landscapes that we design, the buildings that we design. So I think it's very important, and I know that if more and more we start to learn about the knowledge that our Indigenous people have and teach it to our younger generations, I think we'll all benefit from it.
And Brian or Allison, do you have anything to add with regards to Indigenous knowledge or teachings?
I will say that, you know, within Forest Ontario, we have been transitioning to focus on partnering more and incorporating teak. And what the project we're doing that with is called the Truth and Reconciliation Tree Plants. So I mean, outside of Forest Ontario, even within the organizations we partner with, we see more and more incorporation of teak and acknowledging its importance in establishing baselines and understanding changes and trends. And, you know, because we were working with the North Slave Lake Métis Association recently too, and they were showing us all about their data stream project, which was super interesting. It was just data collection points from different community members and sourcing it. But yeah, so it should be incorporated as much as possible. It's an important source of information.
For sure. Brian, did you have anything to add regarding Indigenous knowledge and teachings within environmental stewardship?
Yes. Yeah, I think, you know, we need to be centering Indigenous knowledge within the sustainable sector. You know, when you think about, you know, the amount of time that we've existed here on North America, Turtle Island, you know, and the impact that settlers have made on this land, it is clear that the way in which we live our lives is not conducive to a sustainable future. And so I am of the mind personally that if we are looking for a different outcome, we need to be listening to folks who have different perspectives. And that traditional knowledge is, it's invaluable to, you know, to where we want to be in the future. And so I think Indigenous leaders, communities, knowledge holders should be centered within these types of conversations. Because as much as, you know, we all have our experiences, the folks that are on the panel today, I'm sure you can look at us and see that there are some similarities amongst us. And part of what Allison mentioned at the beginning was, you know, a resilient environment is a diverse environment. And so we need these perspectives in order to reach the solutions, the outcomes that we are aiming for. And so having them centered in those conversations, not simply just being, you know, not simply being invited to the table, but making sure that the table is theirs, making sure that we are the ones coming to them, asking for help and assistance, because we have to this point not really held up our end of the bargain when it comes to stewarding and protecting this land. That's all I'll say. We could talk a lot more about it, I promise.
Yeah, that discussion could go on forever, for sure. But thank you for that. I believe we have Antardeep. you have your hand raised, so if you want to just unmute and you can ask your question, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Antardeep Singh. I have a question for Allison. Like, she told that like we already crossed the limit, like already crossed the line, which we can come back or we can fix the climate change. Like, how an individual like who work from 9 to 5, and how an individual can help to improve our climate, like on an individual level, like what we can do as an individual to make sure that our
Yeah.
climate change is stopped or we
I
can
want to make
fix.
sure I'm not too negative. To be fair, so we have passed a point where we can't avoid impacts or changes based off the amount of carbon we've released into the system. So like the idea of fighting climate change and winning and seeing no change in our global temperatures or weather patterns, that's what's gone. But so we just have to find our new normal, figure out how to adapt to it, and then continue, like we said, with some of those more creative or cutting edge tools for fighting. But as an individual, a lot of the issues that we do see, like you as an individual are probably not going to stop the equivalent of 4,000 airplane carbon releases with the individual choices you make. That's much more structural. So getting involved at a political level and voicing your desire for change and pushing for policy and structural change is important. Whenever you look at environment within like the political spectrum, within the fundraising spectrum, we're a small sliver of what gets brought up. If there's ever a pie chart about like where funds go, environment's like, it's there, but it's not the priority. So making sure that people know it's a priority is important. And then, you know, you can make the changes that you're comfortable with because saving the world isn't necessarily your individual responsibility. So, you know, I bike more places. I eat vegetarian as much as possible. I buy secondhand clothes. You should see me dig through the garbage to make sure there's no compostables in there. I drive my partner crazy. So, you know, it's finding the changes you can make. But, you know, I hear vegans, you know, really impactful because farming practices do have a lot, but I don't have the science to back that up. So please don't quote me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And then we did have another very similar question. So maybe if Brian or Dawn wanted to answer this one, what initiatives can we take as citizens surrounded by nature in order to improve the climate, which is at a very crucial stage right now?
Well, I guess the biggest impact is, and Allison touched on it. I mean, you have to look at yourself. What can you do yourself in your immediate surroundings and, you know, your own impact? Look at that. But unless we get a lot of lobbying to government, a lot of push from government, a lot of investment from government, I don't think there'll be a fast change. I mean, there's so lobbying of government and, you know, in big groups, not, you know, a couple of thousand people aren't going to make that big of a difference. They're going to be heard, but they're not going to make a big difference. I mean, I think that a lot of lobbying and demanding and when you go to vote, make sure that that is sustainability is a key platform that your parliament's going to be voted in on, because I mean, there's a lot of talk in parliament. You hear it for years. I've heard it for years about sustainability is one of the key issues, but when it comes push comes to shove, you don't see a lot being done on it. So holding accountable the policymakers that can actually make the changes, I think that is going to actually have to be the force that makes the changes. But from an individual level, yeah, do whatever you could possibly do to in your own space be sustainable.
Yeah, I think just to sum up what you and Allison both said, I think there's a lot of, it's great that there's so many opportunities for us as individuals to do small things in our everyday lives. But at the end of the day, I think one of the biggest things is really trying to drive our forces into targeting those larger corporations that run most of the world, as well as all of our governments, and making sure that they're implementing changes that will affect the world from a grand scale. So a little bit of both is great for sure. So I'm just going to hand it over to Justin now.
Thanks, Shania. So as we are nearing the end, I'd just like to thank everyone once again for attending. And as we were not able to get to all the questions today, please direct any further questions you have towards us either at our Seneca Environmental Association email, Instagram, or myself, Shania, or Larissa's email here. And we will forward the questions to our three panelists, Brian, Dawn, or Allison, so they can definitely get back to you through us as to answer those questions you have. There is also a poll as provided through NEM that you'll be receiving shortly, and we would appreciate it if you as attendees were able to do that poll for us. And lastly, we have our closing remarks from Ranjan Bhattacharya, and I will let him take it away as the final closure for the panel of this session.
Great, thank you, Justin, and good evening, everybody. I'll be very quick because I know I am between everyone and the end of the event, but it was a fantastic event. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I'd also like to thank our presenters, our panelists, Brian, Allison, and of course, Dawn from our sustainability office. Based on the questions that came up, it seems like it was a very thoughtful, very impactful presentation. And Brian, I pledge to you, next time I see you, I'm going to be on the lookout for a mulch volcano moving forward. So you have a definite willing participant there, and some great comments. I mean, I'm taking a look. It's March 10th, 2022. If you think about it, folks, it's literally almost 2 years ago that we've been living the pandemic life. So it's been that long, and hopefully we're coming out of the end of it. But there's some comments made about how green spaces are so important, not just to our mental health, but to our physical health. And if the last 2 years has not demonstrated that, then I don't know what else it's going to take. But it's good. It's great work. It's a great message that's going on there. And I like also the idea of little micro actions. I think that is something we can all do. Little micro actions will make an eventual change. So great presentation again, and thank you for giving up your evening to spend with us. I want to thank Justin, Allison, I thank Allison. Sorry, Justin, Larissa, and Shania, my apologies, from the Seneca Environmental Association for putting this together. You all are very busy students, but at the same time, you put together these events. So thank you for supporting National Engineering Month. We also have a lot of partners to thank. I'm not going to thank them all individually. They're on the slide. And they're there, and it's great to see such great support for National Engineering Month, which is a great month full of events. Finally, I'd like to thank OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, and I believe there's a couple members that are attending tonight's event. I'd like to thank them for organizing National Engineering Month this year, for everything that they're doing. It's a great event. There are a number of other events. Into the chat, I am just pasting the website that has all the events, and I encourage you to review the website and see what other events you may be interested in attending. So on that note, I will thank everyone again, and I guess we can declare the proceedings closed, and congratulations to the Seneca Environmental Association. Good night, everyone.